Imagine being trapped in a metal tube, hundreds of feet underwater, breathing a mixture of gases that makes your voice sound like a cartoon character. Now imagine that in an instant, that protective nest becomes a death trap. On a cold November night in 1983, 5 men faced this nightmare scenario in one of the most horrific accidents in the history of offshore drilling. But what went wrong? How did a routine procedure turn into a gruesome tragedy? And what can we learn from the Byford Dolphin incident to prevent future disasters? In the early hours of November 5th, 1983, on a massive oil rig in the North Sea, 5 men prepared for what should have been a routine operation. These weren't your average workers. They were saturation divers, living and working in a pressurized environment. But in a split second, their high-tech underwater world became a death trap. Catastrophic failure turned their pressurized chamber into a scene of unimaginable horror. So, how did a simple procedure go so terribly wrong? What caused this state-of-the-art diving system to fail so spectacularly? And what lessons can we learn from this tragic event to ensure it never happens again? This is the story of the Byford Dolphin incident, the world of saturation diving. Before we dive into the tragedy, let's talk about one of the most extreme jobs on the planet, saturation diving. These aren't your average scuba enthusiasts. Saturation divers are the astronauts of the ocean, descending to depths of 500 feet or more to service equipment on offshore oil rigs and undersea pipelines. But unlike most divers who spend a few hours underwater and resurface, saturation divers live at pressure for up to 28 days at a time. They eat, sleep, and work in a pressurized environment, shuttling between cramped living chambers on the rig and the crushing depths of the ocean. Why go to such extremes? It all comes down to a little problem called the bends. You see, when divers descend, the pressure causes nitrogen in their air to dissolve into their blood and tissues. Come up too fast, and that nitrogen forms bubbles, kind of like shaking a soda can and popping the top. The result? Excruciating pain, paralysis, and even death. To avoid this, saturation divers stay at pressure. Their bodies are literally saturated with dissolved gases, hence the name. It's a bit like living on an alien planet, with specially prepared food, distorted voices, and the constant hum of life support systems. The pay's great, up to $45,000 a month, but the work is intense and the risks are real. And on November 5, 1983, those risks became all too apparent on the Byford Dolphin oil rig. The Byford Dolphin, a floating city of steel. The Byford Dolphin was a semi-submersible drilling rig, a massive structure designed to float on the stormy waters of the North Sea. Built in 1974, it was a state-of-the-art facility at that time, capable of drilling in waters of up to 1,500 feet deep. At the heart of this mechanical marvel was the diving system, a complex arrangement of pressurized chambers and a diving bell used to ferry divers to and from the depths. On that night in November, the weather was typical for the North Sea, cool, windy, and unforgiving. But for the crew and divers aboard, it was just another day at the office. A routine operation goes horribly wrong. It was 4 a.m., and most of the rig was quiet, but in the diving area, a team was hard at work. 4 divers were involved in a saturation dive, living and working at a pressure equivalent to a depth of 300 feet. 2 of the divers, Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas, were resting in one of the pressurized living chambers. The other 2, Bjorn Javer Bergensen and Truls Hellevik, had just returned from a diving shift and were transitioning from the diving bell to another chamber. Overseeing this delicate operation were 2 dive tenders, William Crammond and Martin Saunders. Their job was crucial. They operated the clamps that sealed the diving bell to the chamber system, maintaining the critical pressure balance that kept the divers safe. The procedure should have been routine. 1. Close the diving bell door. 2. Slightly increase pressure in the bell to seal it tight. 3. Close the chamber door. 4. Slowly depressurize the connecting trunk. 5. Release the clamp to separate the bell from the chamber. But something went terribly wrong. Before the chamber door was fully closed, the clamp was released. In an instant, the pressure difference between the chamber and the outside world, a staggering 9 atmospheres, was unleashed. The explosive decompression. What happened next was nothing short of catastrophic. The sudden release of pressure created an explosive decompression, turning the diving system into a deadly trap. The rush of escaping air was so powerful it ripped the diving bell away from the chamber, sending it crashing across the deck. Crammond, standing nearby, was struck and killed instantly. Saunders was critically injured but somehow survived. But the fate of the 4 divers inside the chambers was even more horrific. 3 of them, Coward, Lucas, and Bergerson, died instantly as the nitrogen dissolved in their blood literally boiled, forming massive gas bubbles throughout their bodies. Hellevick, who was likely in the process of closing the chamber door, suffered an even more gruesome fate. The pressure differential was so extreme that his body was forced through an opening only 24 inches wide. The official autopsy report describes in graphic detail how his remains were found scattered across the deck, some parts thrown as far as 30 feet away. In the space of a few seconds, 5 lives were snuffed out in one of the most violent and shocking accidents in the history of offshore drilling. The aftermath and investigation. As dawn broke over the North Sea, the full horror of what had happened began to sink in. The Byford Dolphin, once a hive of activity, was now a crime scene. Investigators descended on the rig, trying to piece together the chain of events that led to this tragedy. Initially, human error was blamed. The official report suggested that Crammond had opened the clamp prematurely, perhaps due to fatigue or miscommunication. But as more details emerged, it became clear that the story wasn't that simple. The diving system on the Byford Dolphin, it turned out, was outdated. Built in 1975, it lacked crucial safety features that were becoming standard in the industry. Most notably, it didn't have an interlocking mechanism that would have prevented the clamp from being open while the chamber was still pressurized. This revelation sparked outrage among the diving community and the families of the victims. How could such a dangerous oversight have been allowed? The incident shone a harsh light on the lax safety standards in the booming North Sea oil industry. A long fight for justice. For the families of the men who died that night, the tragedy was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Initially, they received little support or compensation. The Norwegian government, which had jurisdiction over the rig, seemed reluctant to accept responsibility. But the families weren't willing to let the matter rest. They formed the North Sea Divers Alliance, pushing for further investigation and fighting for justice for their loved ones. Their persistence paid off. In 2008, 25 years after the incident, a new report emerged that shifted the blame from human error to faulty equipment. Claire Lucas, daughter of victim Roy Lucas, put it, "I'd go so far as to say that the Norwegian government murdered my father because they knew they were diving with an unsafe decompression chamber." Finally, in 2009, the Norwegian government offered a settlement to the families of all 6 victims, including the injured Martin Saunders. While no amount of money could ever compensate for the loss of their loved ones, it was a long overdue acknowledgement of the true causes of the tragedy. Lessons learned and changes made. The Byford Dolphin incident sent shockwaves through the offshore drilling industry. It was a wake-up call that highlighted the extreme risks faced by saturation divers and the potentially catastrophic consequences of equipment failure. In the years following the accident, significant changes were made to improve safety standards in North Sea diving operations. New regulations were put in place, equipment was upgraded, and procedures were tightened. Today, every diving operation requires an extensive risk assessment and hazard analysis. There are redundancies built into every procedure to eliminate human error or equipment failure. Some rigs are even equipped with special hyperbaric lifeboats that can transport saturation divers away from the danger without bringing them back to surface pressure. The result? A steady decrease in saturation diving deaths in the North Sea. While the job remains inherently dangerous, the lessons learned from tragedies like the Byford Dolphin incident have made it significantly safer. The legacy of the Byford Dolphin. Today, plans are underway to create a memorial in Aberdeen to honor the nearly 80 North Sea divers who have lost their lives over the past 5 decades. The Byford Dolphin itself continued to operate for many years after the accident, a reminder of the incident that had forever changed the industry. It was finally retired in 2016 and scrapped in 2019. So, the next time you complain about your job, spare a thought for the saturation divers working in the depths of the world's oceans. Their job may be invisible to most of us, but without their courage and sacrifice, our modern world wouldn't be possible. And remember the lessons of the Byford Dolphin, because when you're living life under pressure, one small mistake can have catastrophic consequences. Thanks for watching.